We are trying to wrap up the great Galilean ministry. We're having difficulty doing that. I'm still not sure we're going to get the conclusion tonight. As I've been looking through some of the stories that we will look at tonight, there are 3 or 4 of them, and one of them has to do with the sending out of the 12, and the third tour of Galilee. That we could cover that very easily if we took Mark's account, but I really want to dip into Matthew's account because there's some things that are often misunderstood about Jesus' instructions to the disciples. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to Nazareth. And that's where we're going to start tonight with Jesus' last visit to his hometown. His last visit to the village of Nazareth. Let's begin with a look at the map, and we will again remind ourselves where Jesus has been recently and where he's going as he comes to Nazareth. Jesus centering his great Galilean ministry in the city of Capernaum. This blue shaded area is the region of Galilee. And most recently, Jesus has crossed the Sea of Galilee to Gergesa, or Gadara, and has healed the man in the tombs, the demon-possessed man. Come back across to Capernaum, where he is met by huge crowds. Jairus' daughter is sick. Jairus approaches him, and remember, on his way to raise Jairus' daughter from the dead, because she dies before he can get there, the woman with the issue of blood intercepts him, and there is that wonderful encounter where she is healed. But now we find that Jesus makes the 25 or 30 mile journey to Nazareth, his hometown. He has been there before in his ministry and has taught in the synagogue early in his ministry, and we're going to find out what happens on this last time that Jesus is in his hometown. We're going to look at Mark's account. I may have thrown you off a minute ago by talking about being in Matthew. We'll get there in a moment. We're going to look at Mark's account of his being in Nazareth. Mark chapter 6. Verse 1. Jesus left there, meaning Capernaum, left where he had just raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. He left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things, they asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him that he even does miracles? Now stop for just a moment and think about Jesus. He's in his hometown. This is where he grew up. And he comes back to Nazareth, teaches in the synagogue, and people cannot believe what they're hearing. And so they're asking this question, where did this man get these things? What's this wisdom that's been given to him? Now, one thing that does demonstrate to us is that Jesus' humanity was very real growing up, wasn't it? There was nothing that happened in Jesus' childhood or early adult years, till the time he was 30, that would cause these people to vote him most likely to succeed. You know, he's the orator of the group. No doubt he'll be a great teacher or rabbi someday. They didn't expect that. They didn't. His growing up, his humanity was expressed in very normal terms in his growing up years. And so when they hear him teaching like this, they're amazed. They're astounded at what they're hearing. Now notice the questions they ask in verse 3. Isn't this the carpenter? What does that tell you about Jesus? Okay, he was a carpenter. Got that much. What else does it tell you about Jesus? Isn't this the carpenter? He made things for them? Yes. In fact, by virtue of them saying the carpenter, this is a very small village, he's probably the only carpenter in town. And so whatever was needed by way of household furniture, equipment fixed, that kind of thing, probably Jesus had done a lot of that. What else do you think when you think of the question, isn't this the carpenter? Was good with his hands, yes.
But he wasn't extraordinary. They didn't notice anything extraordinary about him.
Okay. I'm sure he made wonderful furniture, but they did not expect him to be a teacher. They didn't understand where he's getting all this that he's saying, because he probably did not do that as they would come in to pay for their furniture. Again, very normal early adult years.
Many men are known by their profession before you can remember their names if you just associate them, like John the pastor, you know which one you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably not a bad idea around here, as many Johns and Jims as we have to identify who we're talking about. Right, John? May have been sarcasm. Yeah, what would make you think that, John? I mean, they're expressing amazement at his teaching, aren't they? And they're saying, isn't this the carpenter? I think you're right on target. I think they are expressing sarcasm. I think they're saying, where's he getting all this? He's no better than us. He's a common laborer like us. He was a carpenter. You know, I may have been a plumber or electrician or farmer or whatever, but he was just a carpenter. I think there's a lot of that in this. And what leads me to believe that is the next questions that they ask. And then, of course, the statement at the end of the verse, too. But they ask, isn't this Mary's son? Now, what do you think they're saying there? Yeah. They didn't say, isn't this Joseph's boy? And typically, especially in Hebrew culture, many children were named like Simon Bar-Jonah. Bar-Jonah means son of Jonah. Okay, you were identified by your father. Do you think there's a bit of maybe further than sarcasm here, outright ridicule? I mean, come on, he's a common laborer. For crying out loud, he was an illegitimate son. That's what they're saying. Okay? Who is he to teach us? And then they go on. And the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. So he has at least 4 brothers. Technically, we would call them half-brothers. 2 of them would later write books of the New Testament. Isn't that interesting? James and the one called Judas, which really is another form of the name Jude. James and Jude would come to know their half-brother as their Savior probably after the resurrection. Because right up till the end, they didn't believe in Him. John chapter 7, the last Passover or the last feast that Jesus would attend 6 months before His death, they're still encouraging Him to show Himself in ridicule. They still do not believe in Him. So probably, and by the way, 1 Corinthians 15 says that He appeared to James, his brother. He appeared to him after the resurrection. So maybe that's the time when James came to know Him as not only a brother but a Savior. But he had at least 4 brothers, evidently children born to Mary and Joseph after Jesus' virgin birth. And then notice they say, aren't his sisters here with us? So plural, at least 2 sisters. We don't know how many he had. They're not named. Of course, you know, obviously sisters don't count as much as brothers. That was just joking. I had 4 of them. I know they're okay. But at least 2 sisters. So really there's quite a family here, but all this commonality. He was a carpenter. He had a common, ordinary, laboring background like us. He's no different than us. What's he doing up there teaching like this? And after all, Mary's son, and we know his brothers and his sisters. Who does he think he is to be like a rabbi? Who does he think he is to be teaching authoritatively in the synagogue? And the last phrase says, and they took offense at him. Now, you know, that's not just a slight statement here. I mean, it's not just like, well, we won't count him quite as high as the rabbi who usually speaks. No, taking offense at him means they were incensed that he would dare to get up and teach in their synagogue. It's that strong. Yes, Walt?
Is there a significance between the question where it was asked the wisdom that was
I think they're wondering, they're tying the two together. The wisdom has to do with what He's saying, but they've heard reports about Him too. Maybe some of them have even seen miracles that have been done, and they're kind of leaping from one to the next. What in the world? How did He get this wisdom that He's saying to us? And we've even heard He does miracles. Where did He get the power to do that? I mean, after all, we know this man. We know his background. So I think they're just connecting the two, His words and His works. But they do recognize that He's teaching with wisdom, right? They just don't understand how this could be. I mean, this is the guy we saw grow up. We know his brothers and sisters. They took offense at Him. Verse 4, Jesus utters that very famous statement. Jesus said to them, "Only in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own house is a prophet without honor." Jesus obviously speaking that about Himself, but typical of Old Testament prophets too. Old Testament prophets were typically sent away from their hometowns, sometimes even from their own countries, to teach, because there is that stigma, of, well, we knew Jonah when he was a little boy, or we knew Isaiah when he was 13. Who does he think he is? And Jesus quotes kind of a common proverb that only in his hometown, among his relatives in his own house, is a prophet without honor. And then notice verse 5, very interesting statement. He could not do any miracles there except lay His hands on a few sick people and heal them. What do you think it means when it says He could not do many miracles there? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. They were questioning. They doubted. They did not trust. Does that mean when there's no faith, Jesus is powerless? Is that what this is saying? Okay. No, we wouldn't go quite that far then. I see some heads shaking. We wouldn't go quite that far. What do you think we have here? Okay. All right, Jim, I believe you're on the right track. I think
he would have felt like he would have been ridiculed. Had he done miracles, they would have maybe not even believed that the man was healed.
right. Mm-hmm. Quite possibly. Yes. What has Jesus just said after the Pharisees, the leaders of the people, the religious leaders of the people, had officially rejected Him? What had Jesus just said about this generation? No more signs. No more signs. There will be some miracles, but no more miracles in the terms of signs. And He does a few miracles, but it's obvious that where there is rejection now, Jesus will not. Remember what He said earlier? Don't cast your pearl before swine. Don't give your message to the dogs. Okay, He's not going to, for lack of a better term, waste His miracles on those who are already rejecting Him, who are not going to believe in Him anyway. It's because of their unbelief that He chooses not to do miracles. In the face of unbelief and rejection, same as the Pharisees, He chooses not to do any miracles. Now, we know that sometimes His miracles were done in answer to faith. There are some times where it's quite clear that Jesus commends the faith of the person and even says, "Do you believe I can do this?" Remember He said that with the two blind men that we saw last time. So sometimes miracles are tied to faith, sometimes they're not. In both cases, God is sovereign. He chooses what He will do when. Sometimes it is in response to faith, sometimes it's not. But where some people take a dangerous leap is to tie every significant work of God to my faith, and thus say it is the measure of my faith as to what God does. No. God is sovereign. He does what He chooses to do when He chooses to do it. Sometimes He does choose to work in response to faith. Sometimes He chooses to work in spite of unbelief. and sometimes He limits what He will do because of rejection. And I think that's the case here. Okay? One other statement is made about this time in Nazareth, and it's the beginning of verse 6, first half of verse 6. And He was amazed at their lack of faith. Only 2 times in the Gospels is it said that Jesus was amazed. Remember, He had real human emotions. And so He was genuinely amazed. Interestingly enough, the other time that it is said that Jesus was amazed, it was because of an expression of faith. Remember the centurion's servant? And the centurion had said, and we studied this just a few weeks ago, the centurion had said, I'm not even worthy to have you come into my home and heal my servant. You just speak the word. I know, I have people under me. I know what it's like to have authority and to respond to authority. So you just need to speak the word. And remember, the Bible says Jesus was amazed at his faith. And here He's amazed at lack of faith. I just find that to be interesting. The only 2 times Jesus is amazed in the Gospels, or at least it's said that He's amazed, are on totally different ends of the spectrum. One is an incredible display of faith. One is an amazing lack of faith. But on both occasions, Jesus was amazed. Okay? Any comments or questions about?
I'd like to clarify what I meant by not anything out of the ordinary. I meant when Jesus was working as a carpenter, not after He came back.
Okay.
And I liken that to a hometown boy
Yes.
going to work for a corporation and rises to CEO.
Yes.
And the people he grew up with say, well, I knew him. How in the world did he do that?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, it's kind of like Rod Thorne, growing up here in Princeton and being one of the head guys in the NBA. And he comes back here. I remember someone who died a few years ago and had been a friend of Rod Thorne's, and he came back, and I remember seeing him at the funeral home, and he was with some of his old buddies. You could tell guys he went to school with. And I'm sure when he was with them, he was just Rod. He was not a high executive in the NBA. And so, yeah, there's that stigma sometimes. Yes, sir.
The time period that we don't, we kind of lose track of what Jesus was doing was from what years to what, as far as his age.
Yeah.
Like where he came into doing all these things.
Right.
Just trying to track back.
Yeah.
Was all this knowledge dispersed, or we don't know anything about a studying time period, do we?
No, although we know that he would have had a typical upbringing as a Jewish young man. He would have studied the Torah, the Old Testament law, and would basically have memorized it like any young boy would in the schools up till they were 10 years old or so. And so he would have had a good education in the Old Testament, and being who he was, perfect man, with no sin clouding his mind, he would have been a very good student. So he would have learned and grown in his knowledge as he was schooled. There's just no indication in his 20s that he's going to be a rabbi or a teacher who will expound and speak like he's doing here. He enters his ministry at age 30. We know that he's had about 8 months of ministry before he begins his great Galilean ministry, which extends for about a year and a half. So we're close to the end of that. So he's a good 2 years into his ministry by this point. And so he's 32, probably, at this point. But it's just a fascinating insight into his family. And I didn't even comment on this, but remember, it was just briefly before this that his family came to Capernaum to try to apprehend him. They thought he was throwing himself into this too hard, and remember, he didn't even have time to eat because of the crowds that were surrounding him. And his mother and his brothers came to Capernaum to get him and get him away from all this. And so you wonder, as he goes back to Nazareth, there's already tension with his family. You wonder what that was like. Did he stay with them while he was there? What did they talk about? Did they try to convince him to quit what he was doing? You know, just a lot of interesting things going on here. But this would be the last time he would visit Nazareth. Last time he'd be in his hometown. All right, anything else before we move on? Yeah, I mean, it's quite possible, Bob, that they might have spread some of those ideas, because when they went to get him, the Bible says they thought he was mad. I mean, they thought he'd pushed himself with the brink. And so maybe they have even stirred up some of that. Who knows? Yeah. 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 That's an interesting comment, Jerry. How many of them would have been aware of his, when he was 12 years old, interacting with the rabbis and the scholars in the temple? How many of them would have remembered that or known that? And what would they have thought about? That's an interesting insight. Maybe some light bulbs went on, yeah. At this point, they're still not putting it all together, but I wonder how many of them might have begun thinking after they heard him, well, you know, remember when he was 12 and they came back from Jerusalem and we heard these stories that Mary and Joseph told us about? Yeah. Interesting. When, yeah. It's hard to tell. You know, it's difficult to know where Mary is in all of this. We talked about it a little bit when we were in that story about Mary and her sons coming to get Jesus. Did they pull her along? Did she feel the same way they did? I can't quite see that. Was she just out of a mother's heart concerned that he was pushing himself too hard and was wanting to take some rest or something? You know, Mary understood a lot, and Mary had to think through a lot too. There are a couple times early in Jesus' life where it says Mary pondered all these things in her heart. You know, she just thought about it, and no doubt it was difficult for her to put everything together. But I cannot see her at any point rejecting him for who he was. Yeah. Okay. A lot of interesting things going on here behind the scenes that we just don't have much knowledge of. All right, let's move on to Matthew chapter 9. The next story is the third tour of Galilee. And let's take another look at the map just to remind you, take a quick look. We just looked at it a moment ago, but he's in Nazareth, and now he's going to tour the whole region again. This whole region of Galilee. It'll be the third time he's done it. First time with just 4 or maybe 6 of his disciples. Second time, all 12 of them. This time's going to be different. He's going to send them out by themselves. Now, do you see a little progression there? You see some of the training, discipling, modeling of the Lord Jesus, where they've been with him. They've been traveling with him. They've even toured Galilee once with him. And now he's going to send them out on their own. I want to deal with Matthew's gospel because Matthew gives us a lot of the instruction that Jesus gave them. And there's a lot of this instruction that has been misused, has been ripped out of context and used to describe a model for ministry now. And while there are some lessons we can learn, and some of it is great modeling for ministry now, some of it was unique to that time. And some of it, we're going to see, some of His instructions even jump way ahead to after the cross and even to the tribulation time. And so we're going to see a lot of telescoping here, where you see what's right in front of you with them going through Galilee, and then the telescope's pulled out, and you look, oh, this is talking about after the cross. And well, wait a second, this is talking about the second coming over here. And so Jesus is putting a lot into these instructions, most of which have to do with the disciples right then, but some of which uses them as a model for later Jewish evangelists, even in the tribulation time. And some of that's been misused, so we'll work our way through it some. I do want to spend a little bit of time on this. We'll begin in chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. What we find here in these verses 35 to 37, is the need for workers. The need for workers in this region of Galilee. And one of the reasons for the need is the work that's to be done. Jesus is going through all the towns and villages, teaching, preaching, healing. The amount of work that you see going on here is amazing, and He's only one person. He's limited to a human body. He can only be in one place at one time, so He needs help. And so the amount of work to be done calls for a greater outreach. And then the needs of the people in verse 36 calls for a greater outreach and more workers. When He saw the crowds, He had compassion on them. That is a powerful word, the word compassion. It's a Greek word which literally means to feel it in the gut. The Hebrew, it actually means He was moved in His bowels. It's the Greek word splanchnoi. He was moved in His bowels. And the idea, the Hebrew idea in the Old Testament was the bowels were the seat of intense emotions like love. In the New Testament, the Greeks saw the bowels as the seat of emotion in the sense of violent, passionate emotion. And you can see why they would feel that way, because when you get really involved in something, you do feel it. You feel it inside. Now, we talk differently today. We say, I love you with all my heart. We use the heart as the organ or the seat of emotion. The Greeks and the Hebrews never would have thought of the heart as being the seat of emotion, because where do you feel it? Now, you may feel a little bit of fluttering, in your heart or something like that, racing of your heart. Maybe that's where we got that. But to the Eastern mind, you feel it in your stomach. You feel it in your gut. And so when they're moved with compassion, they're talking about, the feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when you feel something very deeply. And that's the word that's used here. This is the word this is the feeling Jesus had. This is not just a feel sorry for, kind of mild pity. This is a churning stomach. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. He had compassion on them, and here's the reason why. Because they were harassed and helpless. Harassed and helpless. Like sheep without a shepherd. Now again, those two words, harassed and helpless, are very strong words. They actually have the idea of being in distress, of being flung down. One writer says it this way. What Jesus sees is a picture of sheep that are brutally fleeced, cut and bleeding, lying scattered and flung down violently, as a result, in a state of confusion. Now that's the picture in Jesus' mind. Now they're not this way physically, they're this way spiritually. And Jesus sees people who have been violently fleeced, cut, bleeding, thrown down, used by the religious teachers, the Pharisees, with all of their impossible expectations and their legalism, with all of their man-made standards tacked onto the law of God. They have abused God's people. And because of that, the result is God's people lying, or, the people of Israel lying on the ground, cut, bleeding, confused, dazed, under this weight of expectation of the Pharisees. And Jesus feels it in the gut for them. Jesus is so moved. He can feel it when he sees people that have been treated this way religiously. The tremendous needs of people. And they don't have someone to guide them. They don't have a shepherd. There's no one to pick them up off the ground, cradle them and hold them in his arms and take them back to safety, nurse them back to health. There's no shepherd. There's just the Pharisees throwing more stuff at him. And so Jesus is moved by this. And then there's another reason for the need for workers, and that is the scarcity of workers. Verse 37, then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And we often hear this in missions context, and certainly appropriate there. Jesus is talking about his locality, his area, Galilee. There are 200 villages in Galilee. I'm one person. I can only be one place at one time. And there's only 12 of you. And look at all these people. Cut, bleeding, confused, dazed, and piled on by the Pharisees. We've got to do something. We've got to get out there and meet the needs of those people. That's the feel you get here. You know, that Jesus is saying there's all these villages with all these people that have needs, these sheep that are flung down to the ground, and there's only a handful of us. That's the need for workers. And then he talks about the sending of workers in verse 38 on through verse 5 of chapter 10. Verse 38, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. So what do you do about this situation where there's 200 villages and there's only 13 of us? What do you do? Well, you pray. You don't get upset. You don't get bent out of shape. You don't start being critical of people who are not going like you are. You pray. You pray. You pray. Lord, send out workers into the harvest field. I don't know how many of you read Amy Thing's blog this week, but as I was looking at these verses this week, I was reminded of that. Amy was commenting on the resurrection and Easter and a cult just down the street from them, which was blaring their message on Saturday, and she talked about some people talk about wanting to become a missionary someday. We need you now, she said. She said, quit talking about someday. Come on now. We need you now. And I thought, Jim, there's our speaker for our next missions conference. I mean, she was really preaching the need for workers. We'd probably have to get Dan to do it, but Amy could give him the message maybe. But I just thought it was great. It was so passionate. And she went on to say, if you really know that God is not sending you now, then pray. Then pray for workers. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying here. Jesus says, pray first, and then he says to his men, you become the answer to your prayer. You become the answer to your prayer. Verse 1, he called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles, and he names all 12 of them there. So he says to them, 200 villages, only 13 of us. Pray that the Lord will raise up. Now, you're going to be the answer to your prayer. Go. And he sends them out. And they're listed 2 by 2, by the way. This is the only time they're grouped like this. There are 4 lists of the apostles, 3 in the Gospels and 1 in the book of Acts. This is the only time they're listed like this, where they're in pairs. And so it's obvious that Jesus sends them out 2 by 2 into the regions, the villages and the towns of Galilee. And they're listed for you there. Sending out of the workers. Now, what really interests me is what he says next with the instructions to the workers. I think that's what we have in the outline next, isn't it? Yeah, the instructions to the workers. There are a lot of instructions Jesus gives them as he sends them out. Now remember, he's traveling around the villages, and then he decides, there's so much need here, we're going to split up. That's what's happening here. You know, end of chapter 9, they're evidently traveling together, but now Jesus says, let's split up. I'm going to send you out 2 by 2, and you're really going to get your feet wet in this evangelism, preaching, teaching, casting out of demons and healing business. You're really going to get your feet wet with this. And before He sends them out on their own, though, He gives them a series of instructions. And these instructions are amazing. They are amazing. As I said before, some of them apply to us today, some of them don't. Some of them apply to the disciples right then in this tour of Galilee. Some of them apply to what will happen to them after the crucifixion in the book of Acts. Some of them apply, and He evidently uses you as symbolic at times of men like them who will be the evangelists during the tribulation time. So let's see what He says, and let's see what He doesn't say, because these are often misused. Verse 5. First of all, He tells them where to go. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. So He tells them exactly who to go to. Why do you think Jesus said that? Why do you think He said, don't go to Gentiles, don't go to Samaritans, just go to the lost sheep of Israel? Why the limitation here? Not God's timing for the Gentiles, okay. That's part of it. It's a big part of it. Anything else? Anything?
Desperately loves them, and He sought to win them. And even though they rejected Him, He still loved them.
Yes, He still loves Israel, and is still reaching out to them. Because there are people who have not swallowed what the Pharisees have said. There are, even though the Pharisees, the religious leaders, have spoken on behalf of the nation, there are still individuals in the nation who haven't made that commitment yet to reject Him. And so He's going to reach out to them still. He still loves them. Okay, there's a very practical reason, too, why He says stay with Israel. And that is because there's not much time, and there's not many of us. We can't blitz the whole world yet. There will be a time for that. But right now, we're going to concentrate on this area. And that's a pretty big area. Galilee, 200 villages, that's a pretty good-sized area to be working in with 13 people. So part of it is just practical, you know. Have you got the map handy there again, Greg? Sorry to throw you a curve here. But He's saying, basically, we're not going down here where the Samaritans are. We're not going over here where the Gentiles are, or up here where the Gentiles are. There's only 13 of us, and we don't have much time. We're going to focus right here. We're going to focus right here. Now, there will be time later. As Walt said, it's not time yet for the Gentiles. There will be time in the book of Acts where the gospel will spread to the Gentiles. But it's not time yet. But there's another reason, too. What message are they preaching? Who said it? Somebody back here said it. The kingdom, that's right. They're preaching the kingdom. Who's the kingdom for? Israel. Yeah, Israel. I mean, there still is an offer of the kingdom. Even though He's officially been rejected by the Pharisees, there's still the offer to whoever will accept it of the kingdom. And so they're going to be preaching this message of the kingdom. That's what He tells them in verse 7. So He tells them where to go. Verses 7 and 8, He tells them what to do. He says, as you go, preach this message: the kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Two things they're to do. The first one is preach. Okay, first of all, they have a message. And he gives them the message. This is exactly what you're saying. The kingdom of heaven is near. Okay, still making the offer of the kingdom. So they've got a message to preach. That's primary. And then they have miracles to perform. Okay, and the miracles, again, what have we seen thus far in the ministry of Jesus? What's the purpose of the miracles? To prove He is who He is. Yeah? To prove He is who He is. What else goes along with that? That's really kind of one way of saying what I'm thinking. Not that I expect you to say exactly what I'm thinking. The miracles were always to authenticate the message, weren't they? To give the credentials for the message. That's what we've seen over and over again of Jesus. In fact, we've seen some very clear passages already that describe that's exactly what the miracles were supposed to do. Jesus would say, I forgive you. But then He would go right on to say, so that you'll know I have the power to forgive sins, He turns to the man and says, take up your bed and walk. It's very clear. Jesus is saying the purpose of the miracle is to confirm what I'm doing, what I'm saying, my message. And there are several other clear instances of that we've already seen in Jesus' ministry. So Jesus has already shown this to His disciples. Now He's telling them, you do the same thing. You go preach the message, and the miracles will confirm the message. The miracles will give you the credentials you need to show that the message is genuine. So, yes, you will heal the sick. You'll raise the dead. Wow. Cleanse those who have leprosy. Drive out demons. Now, and He says, freely you've received, freely give. In other words, I'm giving you this power. You've received it. Now dispense it freely. Don't hold back. I'm giving it to you. Dispense it. You've received freely. Give freely. Now, remember again, and this is a totally different study on its own, and the purpose of sign gifts and miraculous gifts. But I'm convinced the Scriptures clearly make the case for the gifts, the miraculous gifts, having a specific purpose of being sign gifts given to the apostles to serve as credentials for the beginning, the planting of the gospel message. And there's too much there to try to prove. I taught a 32-hour class at ABC on sign gifts in the master's program, and there's a lot to talk about there. But the clear evidence of the New Testament is that the miraculous gifts were to serve as signs of the apostles' message, and that's exactly what they're doing here. It's interesting to me that those who talk about faith healing never talk about raising the dead. I mean, that was part of it. That was part of the sign gift, right here, very clearly. They're not only to heal the sick, they're to raise the dead. So if you do one, you do the other. And I think it's very clear the sign gifts were designed to authenticate the message and ministry of the apostles. And there were other purposes as well, like being a sign, 1 Corinthians 14, to the nation of Israel. Particularly the gift of tongues is a sign to the nation of Israel of God's judgment because of their rejection. So there's more there than we can go into now. But at any rate, it's preaching the message that they're supposed to do. Then the signs will confirm the message. The message is central. The message is the focus. So they're told where to go. They're told what to do. And they're also told that He will provide for them. Look at verses 9 and 10. Do not take along any gold or silver or copper in your belts. Take no bag for the journey or extra tunic. Tuna. Yeah, I'm hungry. Tuna. They can take salmon, but not tuna. Don't take an extra tunic or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. This is one of those passages that's often misused. This is not a normal method of ministry. This is not Christ saying for all of the ages that you're to, come on, you don't need to raise support as a missionary. What are you doing out there begging from churches? Get on the boat. Don't take a bag with you. You don't need a staff. You don't need a coat. Just go by faith. There have been some people that use these kind of passages to teach that, you know, the way we do missions today just represents a lack of faith, or the way we do ministry because we don't just forget it all and go. Well, two things to remember here. Number one, this is a quick blitz of Galilee. They don't have time even to go home and get, you know, what money you need. He's saying, let's go. They're already going. Remember, Jesus is already teaching with them. Now He's going to send them out. And there's not time to go back to Capernaum, 25 miles away, and get stuff. So just go. Just go. I'll take care of you. Jesus would indicate this was not a normal method of ministry. Even later in Luke 22, at the end of His ministry, He would actually say, remember I told you one time not to take a bag or purse or, any extra supplies, but now I'm telling you to get all that stuff. He goes against what He says here, because what He says here was just for a particular incident, particular time, a particular blitz of ministry. And there are times when God calls people to do that. But that's not the norm. Okay? And, a lot of people try to take these kind of passages and make them the norm. And Jesus didn't even mean it to be the norm. He made that clear in Luke 22, that this is not the norm. That was for a special purpose. And there's some other things here that we don't have time to get into. We'll get into next time about don't planning ahead what you're going to say, because the Holy Spirit will give you the words. Oh, have I ever heard that one misused? I'll tell you a story next time about being on visitation when I was a pastor in North Carolina and hearing that thrown in my face. It was interesting. We'll have to wait on that one, though. Okay? Let's pray.